I'm going to hand this to you. Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming out today on this extremely cold winter day for this discussion that we're having about Anne Wu's current exhibition. So I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping before we start the actual discussion. The first thing I wanted to say is that the restrooms are located over here in the corner if anyone needs it. Also, this talk is going to be recorded, and we're going to be using microphones throughout the whole event. And so we're going to save questions until the end. But if you do have a question, I will come around with a microphone just so that we can get it recorded. Anyway, so my name is Rachel Vera Steinberg, and I wanted to welcome you to SMAC Mellon. And to introduce this exhibition with Anne Wu, which you are kind of sitting very comfortably in the center of, entitled There Is No Far and No Near. So this exhibition is on view through January 28th, so it's about one more week. We're just about at the end of the show, and we really appreciate you coming out to hear a little bit more about it. I just wanted to also give you a little bit of a background on SMAC Mellon before we start, for those of you who maybe haven't been here before. SMAC Mellon is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1995 in Dumbo, and we've been in this space since 2005. The space was founded by an artist and a musician, and throughout our history we've remained extremely artist-focused, and our mission is to support emerging, underrepresented mid-career and women artists in the production of very ambitious work. And we do that through our three main programs. The first is our studio residency program, which is below us. We give private studios to early career artists for the duration of an entire year. We also have an education program where we work with public high school students, pairing them with mentors to introduce them to the idea of becoming a professional artist in the world. We also give them an exhibition in this space after a year-long mentorship. And finally, we have our exhibitions program, which is what we're here to talk about today. Our exhibitions often focus on, emerging to mid-career artists, but we're really interested in working with artists to produce exhibitions at a scale that they had never worked at before. And so it's often an artist's most ambitious exhibition to date if they're doing a solo exhibition or their first solo exhibition in New York City. Without any more about SMAC Mellon, I'd like to introduce our two wonderful guests today and this exhibition. I wanted to say a note about the exhibition before we start. It was really wonderful working with Anne on this show and really making this body of work come to light. I had originally seen her work for the first time at a group exhibition at the Shed for their Open Call series, which, that show, this year's iteration is on view right now, and it's really wonderful. I think tomorrow is the last day to see the show, so definitely go see it. Always amazing artists there. But ever since I saw that exhibition, I definitely knew that Anne could do a really amazing exhibition for this space. And I was lucky enough to get to know her a little bit more through our residency program, which she was a participant in, 2 years ago, right? Yeah, okay, great. We're really lucky to have her here to talk a little bit about the work, as well as Claire Kim, who will be kind of moderating. Just a little bit about our two guests. Claire Kim is a curator and writer based in New York City. She's currently the manager of programs and collections at the Asia Art Archive in America. She also serves as the director of curatorial strategy at the Here and There Collective. And Claire, we're so grateful to have you join us today. And Ann Wu is an artist from Queens, New York, who works primarily in sculpture and installation. She received an MFA in sculpture from Yale University and a BFA from Cornell. And her work has been included in many incredible exhibitions. And we are lucky enough to have her here today. So I will turn it over to you, and thank you all again for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you to the SMAC Mellon team for helping us get set up today. So incredibly grateful for everyone for showing up on this very, very cold day. I was a bit nervous walking from the train, but it's really nice. I'll only complain about the cold this one time, and then I'll stop. But I feel so excited to be in conversation with Anne, and so lucky to have been reached out by Rachel to be in this space with you today. I think to start off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our strange and long orbit around one another. Someone asked me yesterday when I was talking about what I was up to this weekend, how long I've known you. And I was like, I think we just met. But it was funny because I feel like we've known each other for a really long time. We've been in kind of orbits around each other. We have a lot of mutual friends. I've been thinking and seeing your work. I also saw your work at the Shed, as well as your solo project at Real Artways up in Hartford, Connecticut. But I hadn't met you in person until I think just a few months ago. And we were introduced via our mutual friend, Danny Shen. Shout out. Danny, who is not here today, who asked if this was being live streamed. And Danny's one of those friends who, if you meet a friend through Danny, you are immediately friends with them as well. And there is this kind of deep trust, I think, within the friends that she makes. And so when I met you, I felt like we hit it off so quickly because of that initial kind of introduction. So all that's to say is that I feel very excited and very lucky to be chatting with you about your work, particularly the work that surrounds us here today, but also more about your studio practice and the roots that go deeper into the stories that you're telling.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I'm very excited to do this conversation with you. And yes, thank you all for coming. I might put on my jacket partway through, but you guys, you look very warm over there. I'm thrilled to be here, and it's been great working with Rachel as well. I feel like we've been talking about this project for so long that it was really exciting to sort of arrive at it together. And now we can, I've been dying to do a project with you, and this kind of counts as that.
Cool. I thought that we could, I try to think through how to have conversations with artists, and every conversation is quite different. And for this one, I had mentioned that I was thinking through all of these ideas and themes in your art practice and thought that this conversation could be best had in relation to space rather than chronology. So if you want to follow along, we're going to start in this space here today, move towards your studio space before returning to Queens, as we always do. Can you start us off by chatting a little bit about the title of this exhibition, There Is No Far and No Near, and maybe about how you came across the text that inspired the title of the exhibition?
Sure. Yes, as you mentioned, the title is There's No Far, No Near, and it's a quote from the architect Claude Bragdon. And I found the text in an essay by Yvelin Bois, I think I'm pronouncing that right, called Metamorphosis of Exonometry. And there was something about this line, I just kind of kept it in my back pocket for a little while. And usually when I title my works and my shows, it doesn't happen till the very end. Of course, that's very hard to do when we do a large-scale show like this, and time's ticking to submit something. And I tend to try on different titles, or I keep a running list of phrases that have stayed with me over time. And this time I was lucky enough to get to try on different titles with Rachel and trying to get a sense of, I feel like we were looking for phrases that sort of address two sides of things, or sort of something and its opposite. And I remember, and I recall this line that still stayed with me since the first time I read it. And I thought it encapsulated really well what I was trying to evoke through this work, through this body of work, of this. I wanted to address something about distance, something about perception, without being too literal or too metaphorical as well. I think that can also be something that artists can fall into, myself included. So I wanted something somewhere in the middle of that, in that spectrum. And there was something about this line that felt very declarative and meaningful without being restrictive, and it was also descriptive while also being very evocative. And I wanted a phrase that had some sort of emotional tenor without being sentimental. And so when we played around with it towards having to finalize, it just seemed like a very fitting set of words to sort of capture all the elements that I wanted viewers to experience when they walk through the space, sort of floating through, where the distance between objects become sort of stretched or ambiguous.
Yeah, the title of the text, there's a word, axonometry, that maybe not everyone would recognize. It's the kind of placing proportional accuracy over optical accuracy. So you're seeing kind of everything from a distance. So you can see kind of all of the angles and things, and what you're saying around the importance of opposites as well as difference, I feel exists in this idea of axonometry, where there's this type of intimacy that I think about in wanting to know everything, every nook and cranny, and trying to see everything all at once. There is a kind of there's something wanting to know. And yet, at the same time, to be able to do that, you need to be distant and you need to be far away to kind of take in the whole. And so there's this kind of push and pull that then I think also exists within the works in the show, too. And you kind of describe axonometry as the omnipresent eye of the viewer. And you were talking a bit about previous works, kind of earlier works. Oh, I think if I can find... which feel kind of like ancestors to the pieces that we have around us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about these wall works?
Sure, yeah. I think I was introduced to this text when I was making these pieces. It's really cute. And when I was making these wall works, they're made of wood, and the little lines are incense sticks. And the way that they sort of depict this, how I described it as a railing shape, it's very flattened, but it is sort of like an axonometric projection as far as what you were talking about, this proportional accuracy, where the lines of the sides, whatever length they are, has to be depicted accurately, as opposed to something that's a different kind of, if something that favors how your eye actually sees things, the line would be foreshortened. So there was something about how, when it was translated into these forms and then recreated into wall works, that it was hard to tell where your eye lands when you're looking at the wall pieces. And it kind of played like an optical trick on you. And so that was, I think I had a studio visit with someone and they brought that up and I was like, that does capture a lot of what I'm thinking about, and also what you're speaking to as far as like distance and intimacy being presented or like pushed together in one place.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a bit about two of the pieces in the exhibition itself. I think we can start with Bay 1 that you can see on the audience's left-hand side, the first work that you see walking in with the blue door frame. Within the work, when I first came to see the show, I felt like something had changed massively. I don't, you can recognize that it's Anne's work, but there was a use of color and something about the works in this space that felt anew. And when you had first shared that there was a new aspect of the practice that was really kind of embedded in the found object and your process changing a bit within the use of found object, I was really fascinated and I was really holding on to that. Can you tell us a bit about the stainless steel object that you found and how it's embedded in Bay 1?
Sure. Also, can everyone hear me? I think I'm holding. Okay, this is better. So this image actually would be a good jumping off point to your question. This is when I first started working with this stainless steel material, and this was 2021. And so in many ways, this project has been rattling around in my mind since then. And Rachel has seen various iterations of this. I knew after the project at the shed, I kind of put the stainless steel material on the shelf, so to speak. I felt like that project completed a thought that I had at that time. But I knew eventually I would return to it, which is why I didn't throw out any of the scraps that I had from that period. And in this project, I wanted to find a home for all of these fragments that I've been carrying around with me for all these years. But I wanted them to do something different from how they were activated in the shed piece. I had these, so in Bay 1, and so under the umbrella of the exhibition title are the individual works, which I just titled Bay 1, Bay 2, Bay 3, and Bay 4. And a bay is it's an architectural term for the space between architectural elements. And so I was kind of thinking about the space as these like quadrants, and I wanted the titles to call forth this like idea of like coordinates in some way. And they're titled chronologically based on how I made them. So there's a little bit, I don't know, if you can kind of see the progression of where they came from and where they landed. And so in Bay 1, that's really like the jumping off point for this show altogether. There's a piece that you can see in the slide on the right over here. That was actually taken to my studio downstairs. So yeah, that piece has traveled far and wide. And this was part of my proposal, images to do this show, where I was like, okay, there's like something about these fragments that feel like unfinished drawings, to go back to what we were talking about earlier. And I found them just like very charged and like beautiful, like first letters to a potential word or sentence. And it took, a good year and a half to sort of finish those words. But I was really struck by these objects as like one sort of like cast-offs, I found them in a local fabricator's shop, and basically they were either like taken off of a full railing or door. It's unclear, but it references some sort of like architectural structure. And so there's something about them being mistakes or like too much of itself that I wanted to take with me. And so the idea that they could be completed drawings was really what drove like the making of this first piece, where there was like a lot of potential to imagine what could have been, but it's also like an endless set of possibilities. This is like one iteration of what it could be. And that's like very fun, but also like frustrating as an artist to think that there's like one, but also infinite amount of possibilities, and you kind of have to just choose. And so that work, that's why a lot of times I talk about the materials in this body of work as completing each other's sentences. Now, Bay 3 is then a little bit different, because by then I've sort of like figured out a logic of how these objects would be made. And okay, so in Bay 3, I started with the outline, or like the wood structure, and I imagined something more like a piece of a wall, and that maybe has like an angled up corner that suggests like maybe a set of stairs that's going up, but it's not existent, or it's not visible. And from there, then the stainless steel scraps or fragments became like puzzle pieces that I have to find a place for. And in doing that, it becomes a little bit of like a game of finding the right weight, both physically as well as pictorially, like how it completes the shape. And by physically, I mean like, I had to understand that the stainless steel and the wood have very different properties, and how could it physically hold something up? And in that sense, that helps me determine like the dimensions of how far it goes, or like which stainless steel piece is the right fit. So those are, like, I brought up these two pieces as something that we could talk about, because they were sort of made in opposite order of each other in that way, as far as what role that this found object plays in both pieces.
Yeah. I think a lot about the use of the word meat in your work when thinking about materiality. You kind of introduce these two very different types of materials, the wood and the stainless steel, to kind of find balance. And you think about balance a lot throughout the practice, and it's pulled by partially kind of a ton of calculation, a lot of math, a lot that you can see in these sketches, and then also intuition. And I think that another place where we can see that intuition come out is within the choices for color in the works. And although your work has always long kind of held various color schemes, I thought that this particular set of works was playing with color in a completely new field. Can you tell us about your relationship and how? I just giggle because I feel like I feel like sculptors always avoid color and conversations around color. So I just want to push you a little bit to talk a bit about choices, whether or not that leans into intuition, and if that is the case, your particular brand of intuition.
I'm only hesitant about color because I have a lot of painters in my life, and they're very particular about language. So they're masters in many ways as far as that topic. And as sculptors, we have our own, strengths. But as far as the colors in my work, they've always existed in a very, I guess for lack of a better word, like a sculptural route. Like, it always had to be like, the color comes in because the thing is that color. And so a lot of my color references are objects I was collecting. So either things that I found around the neighborhood, or a lot of household items from 99-cent stores. And those colors are, in many ways, it's like color in a very obvious sense. The plastic retains color in this very like loud way, and that made sense to incorporate in my work as far as how loud the color can be in relation to like the finish of the stainless steel or some kind of other material that has these qualities. But I'm also referencing, as you can see in some of the images, these monastery temple colors that are really really saturated, really bright, but I'm also looking at the colors through a photocopy of a book. And so there's like this kind of cast on them that I felt like needed to exist in my work as well. And as far as like my way of selecting colors, this is how I figure out the color scheme of my works. So when I was talking to Claire, when we were preparing for this, and I was talking about how intuitive and loose my process was, then I showed Claire this image.
Not loose.
And it was clear that I had my own definition. But basically, I will start with a selection of, I don't know, 4 or 5 colors, depending on how large the work is, right? So it's never something that's like all too much one color. There's like a balance of each. So if it's a sculpture that has 3 or 4 colors, they sort of have to have enough of each other. So there's never going to be something that's like, this is the yellow one, or this is the red work. In the past, that might have not been the case, but in this work, that's how I went about it. And how I choose it is like, okay, like for instance, this Bay 2. I really love this green color. They called it jade. I think that's up for discussion, but it's very bright. It's very sharp. But because of that, I knew that I couldn't live next to another color that had that same sort of like potency. And so it had to be something that if it's a yellow, it's got to be like this mustard yellow that's a little bit quieter. And then from there, you know, there's like kind of an up and down. And so there's that word balance again of like where that sort of saturation comes in. And usually I'll have the selection of colors like in the images first, and then I'm drawing out to see like where they connect to each other, and that's kind of where the intuition comes in of like it has to sort of feel right, or it can't be too much of this one color and not the other. And then at the same time, if I'm bringing in objects like the incense sticks or the string or the cast, they also have to have some sort of weight that then either counters the object, the color that it's against as well.
I think that this kind of leads me to my next question, which may be a bit of a ramble, but in a recent interview you had described your own work as, quote, architecture for ghosts. And that's a phrase that I've been it's been in my head for a while, because I was thinking a lot about the architectural aspect of your work, the ways in which architecture often is so tied to purpose, and how the work for your practice, it kind of evades purpose, and it plays with that idea and notion of purpose itself. And I was kind of relating it back to seeing a lot of work by particularly diasporic artists who are children of immigrants, and how we oftentimes see objects, such as the cast objects in your sculptures, perhaps bodily positions for performance artists, imagery that relates back to objects, things that have a very particular purpose within the home. And yet they are co-opted and then used in artwork, and purpose changes completely. I don't know, I just wanted to kind of like talk to you a bit about what the space, what space ghosts hold in your practice. What do you mean by architecture for ghosts rather than of ghosts? And then we can kind of kick it off from there.
I started just using that phrase when I was still in grad school and had finished my thesis work. And that, the work I made for that that time was very much about disappearing into this space that they were being exhibited in. So when I was thinking about that phrase in that way, it was, I guess, somewhat literal as far as like the objects either disappearing or reemerging. But I was also thinking of like memorial spaces at the time too, of like the architecture being a stand-in for things that we might have lost, and how do we see it emerge or not. It depends on what we're looking for. And then over time, I think looking at sort of like these like sacred spaces for color, inspiration, or influence, I was thinking about these sort of architectural realms as a place that kind of breaks with the everyday, and that you enter, and in some ways the purpose of them goes beyond sort of like everyday usages. If it's about like mourning or celebration or just sharing a space. And as far as relating it to, I think in the past, I used a lot of door imagery or very recognizable shapes, right? And in the past, I would probably relate that to some themes of like homesickness or longing or death or immigration or some kind of movement. That's definitely been in the language there. But I think now I'm thinking about these like ghosts as sort of just something that's, it could be beyond that. It could just be like things that you sort of left behind, or different kinds of losses, whether it's on purpose or if it was a choice or not. And so these architectural spaces then become something I create where you can sort of like return and be with those losses or have some space for that.
Incredible. I'm mindful of time, and I want to offer kind of one last, more broad question with you before we open up to questions from the audience. Please feel free to stretch your legs or get a little warm by shaking up. I might do the same. What are you up to now, Anne? What are you excited about? What's keeping you motivated during my least favorite month of the year? And yeah, I want to hear about, now that these works have lived in the space of Smack Mellon for a month now, a bit more than a month. Yeah, I feel like there's always this kind of, there's such a stark difference that I see in work living inside someone's studio and then being presented. There's this kind of, I think the artwork gets a different charge when they have a lot of eyeballs on them. And after a while, I don't know, I wouldn't kind of categorize that as positive or negative, but there's a way in which they like grow. And I'm curious to see what your hopes are for the works now that we are surrounded by, as well as kind of moving forward.
It's $1 million question. Well, when I returned to my studio and none of my sculptures were there, it was very lonely and sad. So I left the studio. And I think there was definitely, I included some images in the slides of, as you can tell, there's a lot of planning, but also like model making. And so there are a lot of models that like never made it, or it's an iteration of each of these that never made it. And I think that there is a future for them. But I think after a show or just like high production, I actually really like the winter months for hibernation. It feels like the world is asking me to do that. So there's a little bit of like returning to, drawing again. That's always like a good place to get back to. But I'm also teaching an introductory sculpture course this spring. So that's allowing me to return to some like early sculpture readings or early art readings, and that's actually been kind of like helpful to think about. Again, once you get to the other side, you're kind of on this end again, and that's been like a really useful way to think through this work as well. Like, how did I get here, essentially?
Cool. Thanks, Anne. We're going to take some questions now. If anyone wants to start us off, we can share a mic.
Okay, yeah, I will bring the mic around if anyone does have questions. And actually, if everyone's feeling a little shy, I can start. So I guess this is a little bit more related to like the production aspect of your work, Anne. I was curious if you could kind of talk about, because this is, you know, a show that like really expanded the work, like physically, but also like conceptually, and kind of brought it into a different path. If there's kind of like anything that you could like share with everyone that you've like learned through like the fabrication of this process, you know, or like something, you know, in that way where that can bring you in a different direction.
Okay, technical question. Well, I learned a lot doing this project. I learned a lot of skills. Shout out to my friend and artist, Sejun Kim, who helped me a lot with the fabricating of the wooden pieces, also helping me realize that I need to be accurate and have very special rulers and tools to make that happen. Yeah, I think in the past I sort of maybe looked at materials as they are and sort of just like allowed them to be in many ways. And I think in this work, because of how I learned, how I sort of expanded a lot of technical skills, I can look at these materials in ways that like to see how far they can actually stretch rather than, you know, this is kind of like how they exist and this is how they live. And in that way, I think there's just like so many more possibilities for combination of materials or like how things enter in, like how many lives that each of these pieces could have, or how many, and they're also like, because of the nature of my work that it's so large scale, yet they have to travel. They're like quite modular in the sense that they can be taken apart, and because of that, that's also allowing me some freedom in seeing how you know, they're not fixed forms, or they are in this case, but I think in the future there's like a possibility that they might not need to be fixed in that traditional sense.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Anne or Claire?
Hi, Anne. I was just curious about, you talked about architecture kind of in this theoretical way, and you showed some reference images of some examples of architecture that have informed your color. But I also know you as an avid photographer too, and I know you like to photograph examples of architecture in different communities and across certain diasporic communities as well. So I was wondering if you could talk about kind of like the pool of references, like photographic references, or how your travels may have informed your work too.
Thank you. Hello. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Taj. The photos, you know, it's funny. I feel like in the past, I use my photos as really important notes, and I think there was like a tendency to try to be as accurate as possible if I was like recreating a form or things like that. And now I think with this work, there was an aspect of it that's sort of like letting it form itself as it goes, and so in that way there's a little bit more distance from these references, but I also realize that those references are so embedded now in my own like mental vocabulary that I'm not as I don't need the photos as much, but I always go back to them anyway. Like I have folders on my phone that's just like doors, and then I love like my favorite feature on my phone is actually going to the maps section, and then I like just click through like I need to find doors that I took like in this area, and then see like what it looks like over here. And for sure, like the architectural elements that have traveled, like the stainless steel, as many of you know, when I first started working with them, they had already been like much more popular, and now they're just like they've already taken on a different meaning. What started as like, oh, is this object that maybe is like pushing against the typical like landscape of the environment. Now it is the typical landscape and of the environment, and so in that way, these items like shift all the time. But also, there's like not just the physical materials and the way that things are. It's also the way that things are constructed or how these materials behave that I'm interested in. So we talked a little bit about like sort of non-functional architecture, and that's definitely holds a lot of space in my phone storage of like things that I find of things that are like retrofitted or sort of like things that don't quite fit together, like stylistically, and that happens a lot in the neighborhoods that I'm in, where it maybe is like primarily immigrant neighborhood, where there's sort of like making things up as you go. Those are part of like the language, the architectural language I'm interested in as well, and I think that also drives some of the making of the work, as far as like, okay, now I have this shape and this material, how do they go together, even if they're not supposed to? But now I found like the perfect way they can go together, and now they have to exist this way, and now they're a language that's accepted.
Hey, and congratulations, the show looks great. I was wondering if you could talk about how the cast vessel, or how you see the cast vessels functioning in this particular body of work.
Hi, Nikki. Thanks, Nikki. The cast objects, I've always included, I think, in a lot of my large-scale works, it's kind of going back to that like opposites thing again, where like I have this very large thing, now I want like a really small intimate thing, and they have to be together. In this case, these are cast of a lot of them are offering cups or altar cups that are initially sourced from 99-cent stores. So I've talked about the 99-cent store before, in particular the like sacred aisle of the 99-cent store. There's like this like high-low thing happening there, where there are all these objects that to me are so beautiful, and they're very affordable. They're very cheap to buy, but they're very precious. And I've always been drawn to the fact that these like how these intricate details and patterns and characters are then sort of registered in this like very cheap plastic, and there's like already a transformation that's happening with the object itself that I then want to highlight through like my own casting process, where I either change it so it's like just familiar enough, but they're kind of exists in this like non-space in many ways. And in this work, I sort of like picture them as like little like punctuation through the space of how you're sort of like highlighting the like ascension of a step or a place of offering or a place of rest when you're walking through the space.
Hi. I had a chance to see Anne's previous work that was in smaller scale, and since this Mellon's like commission is like all about like scaling up and giving artists the space to like experiment, I would love to hear more about the thoughts you and or Rachel had when installing these new works in Mellon's space, because as we can see, this space has a very strong character to it. almost as much as your work's relationship to the temples and your references. And I would love to hear some thoughts about that process.
Thank you. I love all these process questions. Just because when you do a project like this, it takes so long, and at the end you're like, I just want to talk about how long it took and why these decisions were made. There was a lot of back and forth with Rachel about the space. I live in Connecticut now, so every time I would come down here, I would pop in because I felt like I was very scared of forgetting what the space looks like, even though it's very distinctive. But how I scale up, I guess if that's also part of your question, is I make a lot of models, and I always make a model of the space. Of course, I realize pretty close to when I had to send in everything that the model I made, everything was white. So I forgot to that this is this iron color and the bricks and all of that, and there's all these characteristics. And so there was a lot of taking a chance with hoping that the colors, in many ways, against the white backdrop of my models, I was like, okay, maybe this is too many colors. But here, it played with sort of the existing colors that are more neutral and construction materials in a way that was surprising. But it was surprising, and it kind of worked out. Does that answer your question?
I think I might also want to add to this a little bit, just because I feel like, working on exhibitions in this space over and over again, like you said, Anne, it's kind of like a risk every single time because, more often than not, the artworks have never been together before they enter this space, or at least not together at this scale. And so it's kind of like figuring out how that all comes together. And I think that one of the things that, I've seen over and over again here is that there's so much space, particularly vertical space, that a lot of artists want to fill it. And my perspective a little bit is that less is more, and that's something that we talked about a lot during the process of installing this exhibition, that, we could, not easily, but Anne could have absolutely, put 6 more sculptures in this space, but would we really have had the, the psychological space around each object to really consider how it functions as this addition to the architecture? So anyway, I just wanted to add that as part of the conversation that was had during the process of making the show.
Hey Anne, hey Claire, congrats on the show. It's beautiful. Can't wait to check more of it out. I just wanted to ask about Flushing, Queens. I know you're from there, and I just want to ask about what sort of meaning the place has for you as well as for your work.
Hi, hi Herb. Thank you. Also, fellow Flushing resident. So whenever we talked about this too, whenever I get asked about Flushing, it's so hard to sort of talk about it for myself because it's just so part of, it's very corny, but it's just what I know, and it's very much part of me. So it's very hard to split it. And I think through my work, I am always trying to sort of maintain this closeness as well as this distance that Claire spoke about really beautifully earlier, of that toggling of intimacy and distance, because I know the closer I get to it, the farther I can see it as an artist, and vice versa. The farther I get from it, the less I feel that I belong there in many ways. And so I think my relationship to it always exists in that realm of how do I communicate this feeling of what I've seen or what I find beautiful in a place like that without over romanticizing it, and but also like honoring it in some way. And I think in this work, I did want to have that aspect of place be like a low hum around it, but it also exists beyond that, as far as like when I talk about these like abstractist shapes, or where drawing comes in, where it becomes expansive beyond just like one point. I hope that sort of answers that question.
Hi, Anne. Hi, Claire. Yeah, me and her, one question next to each other. Congrats on the show. I really like the installation. I felt like in terms of like entering the space, it really holds the feeling of qi. And I felt like it navigate the qi really well together. So that's kind of like my personal feeling when I walk into the space, and how your work kind of interpreted with the space. And it's really interesting because I've always wondered about the color in your work. And in your talk, you mentioned about the architectural, like the temple and the monastery architectures. But other than that direction, I've noticed that you're using incense and even the casted ceramic cups. Plus, this feeling of directing the qi. Like, I'm wondering about how ritual and this aspect being part of your thinking process, or is it part of? That's kind of my wondering. Yeah.
Thanks, Lou. So all of these objects, I do think I want there to be this. With the colors, I did want to bring a sense of like joyfulness to these sort of very, these very geometric shapes. And if I'm thinking about what brings like emotion and as well as like a kind of rhythm to the space, I do think of like architectural spaces like temples, or place that like kind of works through a rhythm of how people move through it, maybe slowing it down time, so then it's like a contemplative place. And I guess as far as like where all the objects are placed, there is like a very important sense of flow that I wanted, and that would involved a lot of moving things around with Rachel. We have so many images of her holding up pieces, just like freestanding, and it's really like that was really intuitive base of like, how does it feel when you move through, because you become very aware of like how your stride affects the actual like air around the space. And as far as like the actual objects, they've always just lived in my studio, and I like to think of them as like little pieces of where of like my mom's house or something like that, where there's a place in my art that also like connects to this other part of who I am as a person, as like a daughter and all of that. But the way that I have lived around these objects, yes, they definitely exist as like ritualistic objects, but they're also very utilitarian. And so I spoke about how my mom describes like the incense sticks. Of course, it is a very important devotional object, but she also just gives me a pack to like ward off bugs and like rodents and things like that. And so there's something about how they function in all these ways that there is this like very sacred aspect of them, but there's also something very sacred about how they're used in like just everyday life. And these cups too, I mean, I also like keeping them in my work because it allows me to communicate with my mom a lot on this deeper way, where I'm always asking her questions of when I had these cups and these bowls, I'm sending her images, like making sure, how do you explain in your words what this like means to you, or like what these characters are suggesting. And she always, what I've learned is like a lot of them are offering like prosperity, wealth. It's like all good things. And so it seems fitting to put that in this show, or anybody passing through, that there's like this like air of joy and giving that they exist here.
Congratulations, beautiful show. So I'm seeing your work through a lens of architecture. And when it comes to architecture, they're very much tied to specific time, the way they reflect some aesthetic of the era, the material they can use for their buildings and so on. So I'm wondering, did you have any specific time frame or era or specific period you had in your mind while you're working on this pieces? It could be very far past, it can be future and so on.
Ooh, that's a really good question. I guess I can talk about the references that I'm pulling from as like being quite timeless, if we're talking about like a monastery. But then also as far as sort of the neighborhoods I'm thinking about, if we're talking about Flushing, there's something about how the past and the present and the future all exists at the same time architecturally in a place like that, where you have something that's like clearly feels like it's like from the 90s. I was in a show with Herb and Lou. They organized in a Flushing mini mall, and that's a place that feels like really of the past, but yet it's like right in front of us. At the same time, it's right next to a really, really fancy new building, perhaps. And so in that way, I feel architecture is so flexible in how it exists, and it in many ways, that was my initial interest in looking at like the built environment, is that it really captures a lived experience that actually contains many timelines at once. And in this work, I was thinking about that a lot as far as like how these materials have like traveled through eras.
Okay, I think that is about the time that we have for today. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Anne, for talking about your work so candidly and letting us in a little bit. And Claire, thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. Before we end, I just also wanted to thank the Smack Mellon team for everything that they've done today. Miriam, Maggie, Kathleen, and particularly Javier Maria, who is our media systems manager, and we wouldn't be able to run this organization without him. And also thank you to the Foundation for Contemporary Arts for supporting this project. Again, thank you everyone for coming out in this terribly cold day. And our heaters are working as hard as they can, but I know it's getting a little chilly in here too now. So again, please enjoy the rest of the exhibition. In Gallery 2, we have an exhibition by Frank Wang Yifeng, and it is the last week to see these shows. So please walk around, and thank you again.